Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I have a question for you. What makes your partner special to you? And what makes you special to them? I'm going to give you an example of something that occurs to me. What I like about my partner is that she is someone who's nurturing. She pays attention to subtleties. She likes plays. She likes jazz concerts. And at the drop of a hat, we can do a lot of fun things. So in other words, the spontaneity. Don't have to plan everything. That's one of the things for me, because I'm a guy that I don't necessarily have an aversion to planning. It's just that I am so in the moment that oftentimes if I try too hard to plan ahead, something else comes up for me that I might want to do instead. But that doesn't mean I can't commit, because if I plan ahead, then I happen to know that that's something that's going to happen. For example, if I'm going to go to a jazz concert, see, I really love that. And I love that my partner likes to attend the same kinds of things. Now, one of the things that she likes about me is that I pay attention to details. I tend to be the person who notices that the car needs to be washed, or I'll vacuum it out, or I'll do chores around the house that I think remind her that I think that she's special, that she's important, because I don't want her to have the trouble to do it, to come home and then she sees that it's already done. I'm also good at grocery shopping. It's one of the things that I like to do. And another thing, and this is particularly about me, I like to vacuum. It's just one of those things I really like to do. I like to see things clean and neat and orderly. So, and that's something I really picked up from my mom. And I think I don't know that it's particularly unique to guys. I'm sure there are lots of guys out there that like to have things orderly, because, guys, when we have our garage, have our man cave, we kind of like to have things in a way that we want it to look neat. And that's me. And I think that's what helps make me special. But again, it's about remembering what I liked about my partner. And it's that she pays attention to details. She knows quite often how to get into a conversation with me about how I'm feeling, because it's not easy for me to want to just launch into a conversation about my feelings. I tend to nibble around the edges. Some people can just jump right out there. And again, if you've got a partner of several years, you probably know your significant other fairly well. And these things sort of just happen naturally for you. But if you're new in a relationship and you're trying to look for a strategy about how you can, invest your time in learning about these things, it's going to be in conversations. You're going to want to ask your partner some questions and, gauge the mood. But I think specific questions, say, how was your day? And be willing to take the time to actually hear the answer. Because when I think of myself, I don't start into what might have troubled me for that day. I'll start talking about the good things because I don't want to go negative, but then I might then start to dig down and remember the events of the day, and something that may have troubled me that I need to unload finally comes to the surface, and I talk about it a bit, and then I'm done. And you know what? This is one of the nice things about having a relationship partner, because you have that one-on-one. You can unload, you can decompress, and then you can get on with your life. And that's a really good feeling. And as a guy, it's really nice to be able to confide in my woman. Now, the other thing is I want to say, if you're a guy and your significant other, she is there, or he, depending on what kind of relationship you have, and they want to share with you, remember how important it is to be an attentive listener. And that can happen in a lot of ways. You could do a mirroring technique to make sure you're tracking what's going on. And what mirroring is basically is you're repeating back what they're saying to you. And, sometimes we do that in problem solving, and that's just to make sure, that's so your partner knows that you heard what their complaint is. But I'm saying it in this way is to borrow from that technique so you let your partner know that you're tracking what they're saying. And in some instances, it might be an opportunity to look for a solution. And I know that women have said sometimes they don't want the guy to fix it, because that's a really tempting place for men to want to go, is they want to fix a problem because they don't want to dwell on it. Well, remember, guys, and I'm talking to you, is that you're in the listening place right now. It's not the fixing. And I would encourage women, when you have a man who is in the relationship, remember, he wants you to be happy. We all want you to be happy. We don't want you to be upset, because we know a happy wife, happy life. But in the midst of that, making that transition, how we get to that place where you're really able to talk about your feelings and able to unload. And remember, there's a temptation for us guys to want to fix that because we want you happy. We're not always convinced that if you just talk about it, that you're going to be okay afterwards. And I think that takes a lot of rehearsals. That takes a lot of practice to be comfortable with that, to be just listening. So now back to the guys. When you're listening, remember you're doing just that. It's okay to ask, is there something you want me to fix? Is there something you want me to do? And that's when your fix-it skills can come into play. Beyond that, remember to stay in your lane and to be the listener. That's one way in which you can be special to your partner. Something else that I've learned over, the time about being, reconnecting is I would send a text message in the middle of the day. Just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. I mean, just do that. Don't do it every day, because we don't want that idea to get old, but to do that once in a while for your partner and remind them that they are important to you. Because that's where that feel-good feeling comes from, is knowing that you're special to someone specifically. Because it could be hard to buy flowers. It can be hard to buy cars and all of those things that we do on special occasions. But to be reminded that you are important to someone in particular, your significant other, that's one of those ways in which you can do, hey, saying, you know what, you're special. Thank you for being in my life. And you make me a better person, because you make me think of things that I wouldn't ordinarily think about. Those are sweet things to say to someone. And when someone knows that about you, then they really think about how important those things are, coming from the person that they love. Friends tell us things all the time. They're very supportive, and they can make us feel special in certain moments. But that person who depends on you, who you depend on, when they realize how deeply emotionally connected that you are to them, that it really makes the stress of their day go away. They can handle it better, and they turn to you, they want you, they embrace you. And that's a real special feeling. One of the other nice things that you can do is actually send a voicemail and leave that. I used to keep the voicemail message from my girlfriend on the phone, because you can recall it, because it was the sweetness of her voice that always made me feel good. It was that lightness. It was that fun. It was that thoughtfulness. That's something that's really special and personal for that day. But I love the sound of her voice. And that's something that I remember that attracted me to her in the first place. It's, the sound of her voice. And emphasize that and tell her. And ladies, when you're talking to your significant other, your guy, tell him, yeah, I like that, the tonal quality of your voice. It's totally sexy. And every time I hear it, then it just reminds me that feel good, that little shiver goes up my spine. And I like more of that. And I love it when we snuggle, because then you talk to me in that really soft, that voice of when we speak to each other when we're really close. That's really special and intimate. Those kinds of things are priceless. And you know what? That actually works towards that team building thing. When you two, know each other, you're special to each other, and that nothing can come between you. It's like one person can push, one person can pull, as long as we're going the same direction. And I'm speaking emotionally. And these are some of the things that help make that happen. And I love it when it works. And you know why it works? It works because you've invested yourself in it, because you've taken the time to say the things that matter to you. And it doesn't have to be special like you read it off of a greeting card. It's really about what comes from the heart. That's always the right answer when you say what comes from the heart, because it's tender, it's sweet, and it's intimate. And great memories happen from things like that. I want to encourage you to practice that. That's part of your team building. That's part of building your future with your partner that says, hey, you know what? You're special to me. I like doing things with you. And you know what? It doesn't cost a lot of money. I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back for the next segment. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I got asked this question, and it was about how do you get an introduction to someone? And one of the things that you have to think about is yourself. You have to feel confident in yourself and that you have something to offer someone else. And when I say offer, I'm not talking about money. I'm really talking about personality, time, the gift of self-knowledge. Because there's some interesting conversations that come about from people who know themselves and who are willing to share. Shy people might have a difficult time with this because being able to focus on yourself and talk about yourself has to be something that you're comfortable with, because you're going to get asked questions. And if you're shy and not really comfortable with opening up, then you're going to have a little more difficult of a time trying to do this. So you're going to have to imagine working through this. But what I'm describing is a way in which you can become comfortable and talking with someone and getting at things that are interesting to them. Keeping the focus on them, at least as far as the introduction is concerned, you introduce yourself, I think is an important factor in really developing their interest. Because quite often what happens is when we get introduced to someone, then that is somebody introduces themselves to you, they wind up being a motor mouth. And they wind up talking about themselves rather than asking questions about the person that you're interested in. So it's really, if you want to get an introduction with someone, then you ask that person if they're available. Because if you have a romantic interest, and I'm just supposing that this is really why we're in this part of the conversation, because you want to spend time with that person, you want to develop something or see where something can go, then you need to know that they're available. So you could say, hey, are you attached in a relationship with someone right now? Because I'm interested in, I want to be able to spend some time with you and talk with you. And when you're open like that, I think it really signals that you're someone that really will be upfront, because that really helps. Some people are really cagey, and that could be a little scary to want to talk a whole lot about your personal status. I mean, you could talk about things in general, what happened in the news today, but when you kind of signal your intent, then it sort of lets them know that this is a personal interest and they can follow up with it or not. But given that there's an opportunity to kind of, that you're trying to build towards something, that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. But you want to know that up front. Now, the other part I was saying is about being comfortable at talking about yourself. Because if you get asked questions, then you're going to want to know about yourself so that you can answer the question. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out answer, because that's something that becomes a little boring, a little monotonous when you're talking to someone and they just don't seem to know when to end the answer. Keep it relatively brief. And it also gives an opportunity to ask follow-up questions, because I think this is something that when you're introducing yourself to someone, hey, I'm so-and-so. And one of the things that I remember when I was in college, there were a lot of lectures I had to attend to, there were speakers and I had to, say, write an essay paper on, and I might see somebody there who I've in the same class possibly. And it would give me an opportunity to approach the person and at least talk about the subject at hand, and then possibly discuss what their relationship status is. I mean, certainly guys, if this is you, and, look at the hands, see if there's a ring or something like that on. And, it may be, from a significant other, or it could be something that they're wearing because it belonged to a relative. And I think it's always good to ask. Remember, don't do it in a creepy way. Just ask, hey, it's a, beautiful, piece of jewelry that you have on, and you get your questions answered. It's not always out there, but that's your introduction. And if you get that introduction and you find out that they are available, well, then, like I say, move on it and be interesting. Remember, don't focus on yourself, focus on the other person. Give them an opportunity to share things about themselves, because people love to do that. One of the things that guys tend to do a lot is they tend to hyper extend their discussions about sports and things like that. And I can clearly remember years ago, I watched this guy. He was a DJ. So he obviously had a lot of control over the music that people listened to in the evening, and he received a lot of requests. And what was good of him is that he would play the requests, and then afterwards, he kind of the center of attention because he's the guy that's providing all the entertainment. And I would remember women talking to him. But this guy went on incessantly about the remodeling that he was doing on his trailer, which I thought, she really doesn't care about the texture on the walls or the sheetrock or anything like that. She really would be more interested in learning about you, and then keep it brief, and then ask her about herself. And I watched this guy torpedo more connections because he would talk about the same thing. And invariably, he's the DJ guy. So, these women saw him quite frequently, and it's like he blew it every time. And I wondered if he even realized what he was doing. I think the guy was generally interesting, but he was a social nerd, and he didn't get it about how to keep a woman interested in him. Because I can recall listening to the woman make a comment afterwards when she would talk to one of her friends about the guy. Remember, I'm just kind of in the room. I'm not participating in this, but they were so disappointed because he seemed so interesting as a DJ, but as a person, he didn't seem to have much going on. And what I knew about the guy was that he was a really nice guy. He was into computers, and he also could fix things. He was likable. He was a fairly handsome guy. So it seems like he had all the bits and pieces to be attractive, to be interesting, to be functional in a relationship. But when it came to the part about actually finding out about the woman, he failed miserably. And I think just by what I've described, guys, listen, you don't have to be drop dead gorgeous in order to attract someone. And I'm going to say to the women that are listening, I'm speaking from a guy's perspective, but I also want women to understand that guys like it when you share your feelings with them, when you approach them, because sometimes the shyness of a guy is really in the fact that he's just a motor mouth, and he doesn't know. He's socially awkward, and he's probably blown it, and he would appreciate any help that you can give him in getting that directed. That having been said, one of the things that I've noticed in life is, be mindful about where you meet people, because I've noticed that when you meet people in nightclubs, there's been some alcohol involved. And for those that drink, one of the easiest ways to know that a person has some alcohol is that they generally tend to lack what I call volume control. Now, when you're in a loud room, you have to speak up to be heard. But I think it's great when you can take them away from the noise of the establishment and go elsewhere and then have a one-on-one conversation. It can be brief. It can be just an agreement that you make an opportunity to really sit down and talk at another time, because you might not be in a spot where that's really practical. But just to be able to create the opportunity later where you can be one-on-one and really share some good conversation is an excellent way to make an inroad. And like I said, when there's alcohol involved, usually the inhibitions are lower. And by that, sometimes a sensibility too. So if you're one of these individuals that lacks volume control, see, I'm not a person that drinks. So that's why I tend to notice when people get loud and they sometimes don't even respond to the question that's being asked. So that's not a person that would necessarily be attractive to a guy like me. But it's about knowing what your limits are and knowing what you're attracted to and being able to speak to that and having those conversations with people that are interesting. So those are just little tips that I'm going to give you for that. I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. Now I'm going to talk about what happens when you have an argument and you've had this breakdown of communication. And you can call it a lot of things. You can call it an argument. You can call it an upset. Therapists like to call it, upset. That's just sort of one of those neutral words. It doesn't presume fault with anyone. It just says something happened. One of the things about trying to heal up after an argument or in the midst of something like this is you want to have some containment, because you don't want things to kind of get too far out of control, because then it's like sparks jumping out of dynamite. All of a sudden, when the explosion happens and you got sparks going everywhere, where a lot of things tend to ignite. So we tend to like to have some containment on it. But if you're in the midst of something like this that's happening, I think couples tend to have a person that's, one person is sort of the power person and the other person is sort of the follower. And then you do have people in relationships, both of them are type A. So they tend to butt heads a lot. And I think in relationships like that, you really have to have those things ironed out, that you know who is doing what role in the relationship, meaning what jobs, what tasks do you have, so that you're not always running into each other and trying to be in charge of the other person. Because those strong personalities, when they get into arguments, tend to continue to battle, even when they're not necessarily in the argument. But then, that almost kind of fuels it more, because we're not arguing, but by golly, it seemed like they were trying to dominate me. There's always that wrestling for a position. Well, anyway, getting to how do you resolve something like that? I think the thing to start with in your mind, not trying to tell your partner what to do, but in your mind, is that you two are in it together. So you have to start from there, that your partner is not your enemy. They may have feelings about something. They can be really strong feelings, but they're not against you as a person. They just happen to have their strong feelings, and you need to let them own that. And you can discuss their point of view and maybe have some discussions about how you can alter that, or at least come to a meeting of the minds. But what you need to do, and I think this is important when you're trying to resolve at least an upset or begin a new conversation about how you can heal things, is you got to take a step back and be willing to be vulnerable. So it may mean, I'm talking about you, my listener, making the first move. And that first move, it could be in the form of an apology. It can be a note. It could be a small gift, a token of affection, something like that. But this breaks the ice, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to get past this argument. We want to get past what's causing us not to be close. And that can be hard to do if it sounds like all we are doing is just being invested in our own points of view. And if you're willing to be vulnerable and invest in your partner and say, hey, look, I know we're both upset. I'm sorry. And it might be you say you're sorry. You're sorry about the being upset, that we're having a breakdown in communication. That's not an admission of guilt in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that what is happening isn't what you want to have happen. It means that we're not close right now, and I'd like to work on that. And those are the kind of things that you want to say. That's what you want to communicate. Because what you're not trying to communicate, what you don't want to communicate is what I'm trying to get at. You don't want to communicate that you're in this to win the argument. Because trying to win an argument basically tells your partner, especially when they have their point of view, that they might be pretty entrenched in their point of view. I mean, it might be a basis of fact, and in your mind, it could probably be pointless. They probably don't have a leg to stand on. But you know how it is with people in their pride. Sometimes it takes a while for them to see the error of their ways. And this might be an opportunity to kind of help curb some of that, but it won't ever happen if we can't get into a conversation. So you got to be vulnerable about it. Remember, you two are still a couple and they are still on your team. They happen to have their point of view. But remember, you're communicating, hey, I care about you. I'm sorry that we've had an upset. What I'd like to do is for us to be able to talk about it. And what you're going to do is that's going to help break the ice. You want to communicate these things specifically. You say, look, I'm not here to win. I'm not here to dominate you. I really want to hear what your point of view is. And the thing about when you have breakdowns of communication like this, upsets, arguments, whatever you want to call it, when you get to the discussion part of it, learn how to limit the each person talking to, maybe a minute or two, because you don't want to just go on endlessly with one person talking, the other person having to listen, because it's easy to start reaching into, it sounds like, you start making accusations, and, you really need to stick to the facts. And sometimes that's a good reason why you bring up the idea, hey, I'd like to talk about this. So how about we just kind of go back into ourselves and think about what we're upset about so that we can come back and talk about it, so that we're specific to the issue, so it doesn't become personal. Because when we start making personal attacks, or at least what we feel are personal attacks, then it's hard to be vulnerable. And I want both people who are listening to this podcast to understand that it's hard to be vulnerable when personal attacks are coming out. I mean, if you could be clinical about it, it's easy, because then you can be like a fly on the wall and you're watching this. But that is very hard to do when you're in the midst of it. And being that you have some emotional investment in it, you obviously it's important to you to feel like you're being heard by your partner. So this is why when I say the being heard about how long we're going to speak, you need to keep it brief, 1 to 2 minutes. And one of the things that I like to do is like to write things down as they're being spoken. That way you can kind of keep track of it. Because a lot of times when you're writing them down as to what the subject is, the person you're paraphrasing in a sense, you might find out as what you're writing about, sometimes it's the same thing over and over and over again. And that could be clues as to what it is that you can solve, and it might take care of a lot of things. Problems in a relationship tend to fester, and when they do that, then it sort of invades so many other things, because it's just in the back of your mind, eating up time, taking up space in your mind, needing to get resolved. And some people leave clues as to them being upset. And some people are very good at being silent. Some people are very good operators. They're just soldiers. They get in there, they do whatever it is they need to do and pretend that everything is okay. And those are great partners to have. There's nothing wrong with it. But the thing is, if you're a person who seems blindsided by stuff because you didn't know that your partner was feeling a certain way, well, I think one of the operational things that you should have in your relationship is checking in with your partner and see how they feel. Because quite often, you might find out that it's really not you, the individual, that they're upset at. It could be a situation / circumstance that happens, and you might be able to be cause in the matter, cause to be able to fix it. And that's a nice feeling, because if you're a person who likes to be a fix-it person, like I'm one of those kinds of people, it makes me feel like a hero, then knowing that I'm not the fault really makes me feel good. But going back to the upset part of this is that if you are in this conversation and you are the person who may have said something that upset them, take ownership of it. Don't deny something that, you said. Maybe it didn't come out with the same intent that you meant for it to. You can clean it up, you can correct it. And I also think that's something important to know, that when it comes to discussions, arguments, whatever, that if you say something wrong, it's okay to change it. And I think that's important. I think standing on something just because you said it, when it's clearly wrong, it's, bad decisions are only made worse when you stick with bad decisions. It's better if you change it and make it better. And, you can always negotiate those things. And that will make your partner feel better, because it shows that you value them, and giving them a voice in your heart makes them feel extra special, because we don't give that to everybody. We don't give everyone a voice with us. and knowing that they can speak to your heart. And you need to tell them that. You need to tell them, hey, you know what? You can speak to my heart. You can speak to me. I want to listen to you. I want to fix this. I want to be cause in the matter. And I think when you approach it in an honest and open way like that, you give yourself so many opportunities to heal your relationship and to be a good example for both of you, so that when this thing goes on, as the relationship goes forward, you know that you actually have tools in your toolbox to fix your relationship. Because I'm sure we hear examples of people that do it well and people that did it poorly. And we don't want to be one of the statistics that had it not work out so well. So I encourage vulnerability, honesty, be a good listener, let your partner know that you value them, and that we can come to a solution. See, that's important too. You need to reinforce that idea that, yeah, we can work this out. Let's do it. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.